Right now, streaming on WFSB Plus, it's day 16 of the Michelle Troconis trial. We're 3 weeks into the case. Right now, we're checking in on what's happened so far this week. You'll remember Troconis is one of 2 people facing charges in connection with the disappearance of New Canaan mother Jennifer Farber-Dulos. Many of you have been watching the case play out from the courtroom while watching on WFSB Plus. Thanks for joining me. I'm Sam Smink. Joining me right now is criminal defense attorney Walter Hussey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Sam.
Well, Hussey is well known for his work on cases like this, but again, he is not working on the Troconis case. If you're just getting familiar with the case, you'll remember Jennifer vanished back in May 2019 in the midst of a divorce and custody battle with her estranged husband. Michelle Troconis was dating Jennifer's estranged husband at the time. He was also facing charges for Jennifer's disappearance. But Farber-Dulos died after attempting suicide back in January 2020. Plus, a friend and attorney of Farber-Dulos, Kent Mawhinney, is also facing a charge of conspiracy to commit murder. His case hasn't gone to trial yet. But for Michelle's case, lots of evidence presented this week, and we're discussing what it could mean to the jury and their decision. Breaking down the details from what we've heard this week, talk about the situation with jurors. For many of you who might not remember, another left the case this week. When do we need to be concerned about not having enough jurors?
Right now is the way I look at it, because so far I think they've lost 3. They have 2 alternates left. I believe one of the regular jurors is off the trial. I think this week that's the person that was excused because they had to go out of the country. I think the biggest problem that you're going to face is sickness. A lot of people are getting sick. I know my family, friends are getting sick. You're in close proximity. If they do get sick, I mean, it could really derail the whole case. Yeah, and we're seeing with a case that is this long, there's a lot of opportunities for jurors to get sick or for, family emergencies to happen. That's what happened with this juror. I guess he had a family emergency out of the country and just had to leave. Yeah, I mean, it's a big, big problem. I'd be concerned if I was the state. I'd be concerned if I was the defense. I think the state's probably even more concerned because they put so much time and effort in putting on a case, and to start all over again would be disastrous for them. Well, I guess we're just going to have to see. And Matt McFarland is joining us right now to just kind of catch us up on what has happened today. We've only got a little bit of an update from him earlier today, so let's tune in.
Hi there, Sam. Well, they are at the lunch break for today, what would typically be the lunch break, but actually it's the end of the day. The state wrapped up their witness for it today, so jurors are allowed to go home, and they'll be back here Monday at 10 o'clock. So court started this morning with Christine Roy back on the stand. She was the now retired forensic examiner from the state crime lab, sort of the forensic biology unit. They finished up cross-examination with her today. After that, state brought Anita Valonis on the stand. She's also now retired, former forensic examiner with that forensic biology unit as well. So the 2 of them sort of split up that forensic biology testing of a number of pieces of evidence. Valonis telling jurors today how she looked at a number of pieces of evidence, from gloves that were recovered from those Hartford trash cans, in fact, a set of gloves, black garbage bags, a kitchen sponge, broken mop handles, testing all of those for evidence of blood. She said she did those screening tests. She said she got positive hits on those. She also took swabs for DNA to send those for a DNA analysis. She also said she recovered a number of hair-like fibers. She tested those to determine that those were in fact human hairs from, again, one of those sponges that was recovered, also from a towel that had blood-like stains on it. So those were forwarded along to DNA analysis as well. So a lot of testimony today. When it was time for cross-examination, Attorney John Schoenhorn, who represents Michelle Troconis, basically questioned this witness, saying, well, did you realize that some of these items were just found in a garbage can? Could that have cross-contamination? She says, well, it could. He said, would there be another way to do this? She says, well, you're talking about garbage. A crime scene is not a forensic laboratory, so there's different scenarios. So she says this is the best they could do in that. So again, she wrapped up today. We're expected to hear more testimony from whomever that state's next witness is when they come back here on Monday morning at 10 o'clock.
You did mention that they're expected to testify yet again on Monday, possibly. But what else can we kind of maybe look forward to next week, if you have any idea?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, because state didn't say. Sometimes they will tell you when the end of the day is who they have coming up, but it sort of seems that we're sort of building to find out that DNA analysis, because they've, again, tested a number of items for blood, only getting 3 confirmatory positive tests for blood. A number of these presumptive or screening tests, they came back positive, but they said they didn't do any more confirmatory tests because they didn't want to sort of diminish the sample size that they could then send to the DNA analysis. So obviously it seems like the next step we'll be hearing from those in the state lab that worked on the DNA portion of this case.
Well, Matt, thank you so much, and thank you for all that you've been doing for the last 3 weeks covering this, and we look forward to hearing more later in the afternoon with our shows and then next week as well.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sam.
And Walter, just so everyone knows, Walter couldn't hear what Matt was saying, but he was just talking a lot about what you and I were saying earlier, that the 2 forensic lab experts were on the stand talking about the blood samples that they took from the garbage bags they found in Hartford, that police connected to Fotis Doulos in his truck driving around Hartford, dropping some garbage bags. We know from some of my notes that there appeared to be a bra, 4 zip ties, a shirt soaked in what appeared to be blood. That forensic lab expert testified that Doulos' fingerprints were on several items collected from the garbage bags containing his wife's bloody clothing. But then you and I were talking about, we know that the blood had been connected to Jennifer's clothing, but they haven't yet come and testified, and Matt just said it, they hadn't testified yet that the DNA is hers.
Right. Well, they're going to link that up. So it hasn't happened yet. So the jury hasn't heard it yet. So it's kind of almost like in sequence. I think the original police officers had mentioned that they believed that they found the presence of blood but weren't sure. So they took some samples. It's sent to the lab. I believe the person testified yesterday that it was in fact blood. And a third person will come from the lab and connect it all together.
Yes, Matt said they're expected to possibly talk on Monday. Now, for anyone that maybe doesn't watch trials quite often, you might just think, why can't they just come out there and say, oh, well, we tested Jennifer's bra for blood. It's her blood. It's her DNA.
Well, you got to take the proper steps. And so the first thing is the acquisition, who did it and how. And that was already testified to. Where was it sent? What did that person do, which is the person that's testifying now? That's their function, just to identify exactly what it is. And then a third person will say whose blood it was.
And then we know that, well, there was testimony that showed that Michelle Troconis was in the car with Doulos, but there's nothing that necessarily ties her to the garbage bags.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, so, I've seen the clips, so I haven't seen all of them. I don't pretend to see it, but I think if they had something better, they would have shown it by now. I said this in the past, the fact that she's in the car, this presence, acquiescence, doesn't mean anything. They got to prove much more than that. She has to be involved somehow, some way. We've yet to see that. And we're in, day 16?
Yeah, you and Kara had talked about last week that, of course, the state has to prove beyond reasonable doubt. But in your opinion, you haven't seen that beyond reasonable doubt.
Yeah, so some of the things the theme that I've talked to Kara about, I'll just revisit it, is the way Troconis was charged with a conspiracy to commit a murder, right? They have to prove, the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Jennifer Doulos was murdered, all right? And I think they really wanted to. And they wanted to establish once and for all she was murdered, she didn't disappear, it's not a Gone Girl scenario, and that Fotis Doulos is responsible for it. As the evidence comes in, it sure looks that way, okay? They're not done producing all the evidence, but it looks as if Fotis Doulos was responsible for her murder. Pretty close to beyond a reasonable doubt. It's supposed to keep an open mind, but it's going that way very well for the state. But here's the problem. He's not on trial. She is. So they have to connect with the conspiracy. Somehow there was like some sort of agreement between the two for all of this to happen, and I've yet to see any of that.
And you and I talked about that conspiracy couldn't be considered. She's in the car, and we see Doulos drop off those bags, but there's nothing that you've heard from the state so far that proves that she knew what was in those bags, that she knew what had happened.
Right. There's no evidence of that. So to your point, people talk to me from time to time about, they give me their ideas on what's going on. They're not on the jury, so it's okay. They can speculate as to how they see the trial going. I discuss it with them. And there's kind of a split, but most people agree, where's the evidence against Michelle?
And we were talking about another testimony that happened this week. It was retired State Police Detective John Kimball. He mentioned that Troconis never originally told them about her trip to Hartford with Doulos and that there were other changes in her statements. Does that help or hurt her case in jurors' eyes?
I don't know. It's hard to say. You know, it would be a lot easier for us to analyze this if we were sitting in the courtroom, and that's one thing that's difficult from 30,000 feet above the ground looking down. It's easy to make comments, but when you watch a trial, if you're physically there, you can see how the juror is reacting to what the people are saying. In terms of that interviewer, there was multiple interviews. Her attorney, Schoenhorn, has said, look, her primary language is Spanish. She grew up in Venezuela. She speaks English, but that, imagine being in Venezuela, being, subjected to 6 hours of interrogation in Spanish when your primary language is English. Start thinking about that. It'd be really difficult. And the things that I saw, there was things said to her, such as, you could be charged with murder. You might lose your child. Things of that nature to compel her to cooperate. And you would think if she knew anything at all in that position at that time, she would have said something. At least that's the way that's my takeaway from what I've heard. I haven't heard all 6 hours, but the highlights that I've heard, I've yet to hear something that says she's responsible for aiding and abetting in this crime. And that's the wrong terminology, but assisting somehow in this conspiracy. And they spent a long time talking to her, and was she forthcoming originally? No, but eventually they said to her, they even said, you've been basically primarily honest. There's a couple things we're worried about, and they asked her about those things.
And you said, we were talking about it earlier, you said in your experience as a defense attorney, it's quite common for people to have kind of those mistakes when they're talking to police, because maybe not everybody is used to talking to police in these capacities.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a lot of things. I mean, it could be they're lying, right? They could be telling the truth, or they're just mistaking it, or they're nervous. I mean, if you can imagine, if you were being interrogated, it looks as if this woman is not gone, but why would she disappear, right? She's got 5 kids. It looks like photos is involved. They're certainly telling her that. So she's kind of cornered at that point. If she knew, you would think she would have said, let me tell you everything right now. And she never said that. And keep in mind, after he committed suicide, she's still yet to say, okay, he's gone, I'm not afraid of him, let me tell you something. If she knew something, you think she would have said it by now.
They also focused a lot on this, and I don't know how much you were able to catch it, but they also focused a lot on a red pickup truck and its potential connection to the day Jennifer Farber-Doulos disappeared. Someone had testified that it was found on video to be near where Farber-Doulos' car was later found. It was processed 3 different times. Just dipping in and out watching the trial, I wasn't sure how that connection kind of speaks to Michelle.
It really doesn't. It speaks to photos, right? So that all goes to the murder aspect that they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So essentially what I know about that was a Tacoma. It was an old vehicle that one of his employees had. He switched cars with that employee on that day in question. They claim that the car, they can't say precisely because they never got a plate read, but I think on the Merritt Parkway and some other roads, they were able to pick up the Tacoma, at least that's what they think it was, in close proximity heading down towards New Canaan. And I think their theory goes a little bit farther than that. I think what they claim is that Photos had a bicycle that he rode over to the residence. He basically lied in wait, murdered Jennifer, drove her car, which was a Suburban, back to where the Tacoma was in close proximity, drove the Tacoma back up to his place of residence where Michelle was. That much is true because Michelle said he did come home around 12:25, and they're able to document that.
You and I were talking about how we're trying to connect the dots every day, especially at the end of the week when we're catching up like this and doing these summaries. And so the tension span of the jurors can sometimes be hard. Can you get in a little bit of that?
Well, yeah, think about it. The way I look at it is, remember being in school? And you look at
I actually liked school, though. I think I was an anomaly.
Well, I didn't. But anyway, there had to have been some class you didn't like, right? And you're looking at the clock and it goes backwards instead of forwards. And you're like, can we get on with this? So there's those moments in a trial. You can't help it. I mean, it's not television. They're not selling products and getting to the conclusion in 60 minutes, like they do on television. So there's going to be times when it's really, really dry. And you got to, even as an attorney, you got to say, okay, I got to focus here. I got to stay in this, It's human nature. For a juror, it's even harder, especially in a case this long. But I think, your attention will pick up accordingly when people are testifying, like when you get to the meat and potatoes of the case.
Because you don't necessarily always start with the meat and potatoes of the case. I know a lot of people are used to watching crime dramas and that sort of thing where they, the bombshell is right there at the beginning, but the prosecutor has to build the case.
Yeah, they do. And, they have different strategies from what I can see. The state, in this case, I think what they're doing is basically just following the natural timeline of what happened from the disappearance and all the interactions that they had, because shortly thereafter, they did talk to Michelle in those interviews, and they kind of played those, and then we're going to get into what they did with the information that they found, because they were able to determine, they took his phone, his phone, when he went to speak with them shortly after the disappearance. They got a search warrant. They were able to get into his phone and find out that he made a call, I think it was like 7:25 on the night in question on Albany Ave. So and I've discussed this before with Kara, it's pretty impressive what the police can do. So they have something called C4 in Hartford, and it's cameras that are on particularly like major thoroughfares like Route 44 or Albany Avenue.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
It's amazing what they can do. So they were able to pick up the Raptor, they were able to pick up the images, and they can follow the car from intersection to intersection.
They can just type in their system like exactly what they're looking for with a certain car.
Yeah, it's an incredible tool for them, for law enforcement, to prove things. So I think in the old days, they wouldn't have had any of this. They would have never been able to see that the Raptor was on Albany Avenue. They would have never gone and got the evidence that they were able to get out of the trash bins or the sewer. So all that would have never came in if it wasn't for C4. And furthermore, it wouldn't have came in unless he had his phone, which they were able to take, and they got a warrant for it, so it was legal. And they were able to determine that's where he was at 7:25 that night.
And this kind of makes sense in the natural order of things, because if you are charging Michelle with conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with evidence, you first have to, as you mentioned before, prove that Jennifer Farber-Dulos was murdered in the first place.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I've been driving this point home from day one. It's something I think they felt they needed to do, and I can see their point of view. If I was a prosecutor, it's like, let's put this to bed once and for all. This woman was murdered. It was terrible. It's a tragedy, which it is. And, I would agree with them 100%. You leave, 5 kids without a mother. It's terrible. So who naturally is the suspect? It would be him in any case, especially when they're going through a divorce. And then if you can, let's just say he went to trial. How could he possibly explain his movements on Albany Avenue? I don't think he could. And you might remember when he committed suicide, he was going to go back to court because they wanted to revoke his bond because there was some issue with whether or not he had sufficient surety on the properties. In other words, the properties, I think, were underwater that he claimed he had equity in. So he knew the jig was up. He killed himself. And I spoke to Kara in the past about this. It would have been helpful in that suicide note if he said, this is what happened. Unfortunately, he didn't say that. I think he pretty much exonerated himself. He definitely exonerated Michelle and Kurt Mawhinney, but I mean, it's kind of useless if he's not going to say what really happened.
I don't know if this is something that you can answer, but in that case where Farber-Dulos does kill himself, and if you're Michelle's defense attorney, and if she knew something, which again we don't know that she does or doesn't, if she knew something, you would tell her to tell police. Is that kind of the natural guidance, or?
You mean right off the
well, because you had mentioned
inception?
it too, like you had said there may be some doubts that she does know anything, because police said to her multiple times, like, you could lose your children, you might go to jail for a long time.
Well, that's true too. It's dependent. People come to me, and there's a couple possibilities. I tell them, I said, if the police want to talk to you, or if they think you're involved in a crime, it's their job to solve the crime and put you in jail. It's not your job to help them. So oftentimes, you might have a guy that thinks that he can outslick the police, and that's not a good idea. So even if you're innocent, a lot of times it's better just not to say a word to the police, because things can get twisted. And so my course of business would be to say, unfortunately, the police don't like it, but it's like there's no point in saying anything at all, because you don't know how that's going to come out. It's their job to prove you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. She chose to speak to him. She brought an attorney. It's not the attorney she has now. Some people feel that's the way to go. She had her shot to say, hey, this is what happened. If she knew, she never did. She was under threat of, possible situation she finds herself in now.
And we know there's a possibility a deal was put on the plate, because with Kent Mawhinney, he took a deal, yet we don't really know what, or we don't officially know he took a deal, or?
Sam, we don't know.
Yeah.
We do know this. And so he originally was charged like Michelle. He made bond. somehow he violated the conditions of his release. He was remanded to prison. I believe he was there about 6 or 7 months. And he decided to cooperate with the state's attorney in the investigating people. He gave some sort of information that basically resulted in him no longer being in prison. I'm not privy to what he said. I've never seen the statement, so I have no idea what he said. But obviously it had to have been advantageous to the state, otherwise they would have left him in prison.
That makes some sense, too. And, of course, we're always Monday morning quarterbacking. We're not the ones actually coming up with the arguments on either side. But you and I were talking about how they briefly had, at the end of yesterday, the state-appointed guardian who came and was along for all of the, I guess she oversaw Jennifer and Fotis's interactions with the children.
Right.
And she didn't, in my opinion, didn't add much, besides the fact that I think the state maybe wanted her to say that she never actually went in the house.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm scratching my head on that one, too. It's like she didn't seem to hurt anyone with her testimony. Basically, she said they got along for the most part, right? So there wasn't any rancor. So I'm not quite sure why she was called as a witness.
That's where you and I were talking about the fact that sometimes attention spans can get into, with some of the stuff you're dragging on, a juror might have sat there and been like, I don't really understand why this person was here. And then that can get confusing. So that's why it all comes down to strategy.
Yeah. Again, I'm not sure why that witness was called. I don't think, the person added or hurt anyone. It certainly didn't hurt Michelle Troconis. I mean, that's why she's the one on trial. So I think, we're all saying at this point, let's get down to it. So in the coming weeks, hopefully, the main presentation will come out. We'll see what they think they can do to connect her to this crime, because right now I'm somewhat in the dark. I mean, circumstantially, there's enough to make you think, okay, maybe she's involved, but beyond a reasonable doubt, I haven't seen it.
And of course, we're talking about what the state prosecutors are doing because they're the ones presenting their case right now. But on the defense's end, what have you seen them do well? What have you seen them maybe need to do more of in the coming weeks? Well,
she's got a really good attorney. All right, John's very smart. He's very aggressive. I think he's doing, a great job up to this point, because really, what is he going to do? He's trying to fight some of the things, some of the evidence that he felt shouldn't come into play. He's trying to stand up for his client where he sees fit. But the bottom line is most of the evidence, let's be real, is all generated towards Fotis and not her, at least not yet.
But we don't know what's going to come in the next couple weeks. We could be having that bombshell or maybe something that points a little bit more to her involvement.
Or not. That's the whole thing. Maybe they think they have enough circumstantially, and they feel, okay, we can prove that Fotis committed this murder beyond a reasonable doubt, and we can get her with a conspiracy. Frankly, I don't see it yet, and maybe they don't have anything more, but maybe they do. I will hope they do. If they're saying that she did disprove it.
And I've covered criminal cases as a journalist for more than a decade now, and I've asked this of several attorneys, both prosecutors and defense attorneys. Do you think it's harder these days to prove beyond a reasonable doubt because of those shows we've seen like CSI and Law & Order SVU that make it sound like if you don't have that absolute DNA proof, it didn't happen?
I don't know for sure. I mean, people do think that, particularly the state. That's a concern they have, but when we're selecting a jury, that comes out often. The state will ask the prospective jurors, say, hey, do you watch these shows? A lot of times people say yes, and they're like, would you expect that to happen in our case? And you realize that's TV, and like one of the judges used to say, they got 60 minutes to sell, a couple Ford pickup trucks and present the whole show in 45 minutes. It's wrapped up in a nice, pretty bow. I mean, that just doesn't happen in reality. And I think the state has the ability to let the people know, look, it's not television. You will see some DNA. It's kind of boring, to be honest with you, but it's important. It is important and has its place. But I don't know what DNA they're going to attach to Troconis in this case. It seems to be all Dulos and Jennifer's blood. And the fact that, obviously Fotis killed her and was trying to get rid of the evidence. Now, the question is, did she help her?
Yeah, it sounds like naturally.
Help him, I'm sorry.
Oh, and then naturally, it sounds like from what Matt was saying. So today was the testimony, and parts of yesterday was the testimony about the blood, tying it to Jennifer, and then the next natural sequence of events would now be the DNA tying the blood to Jennifer as well. But again, that all just goes back, as you said, to Fotis.
Right. So I'll make you a juror in this case, Sam. I mean, what have you seen? What does that do in your mind to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt that this woman has done anything wrong.
Well, I think there's a lot of debate about, I think the jurors will have a lot of debate ahead of them.
For sure. But we're not there yet. And by the way, to be fair to the state in this case, I'm jumping to conclusions, which I can do easily, but the process, the way it's supposed to work, is the judge will tell the jury, look, keep an open mind, and that's really important. You can't start making up your mind like,
no, you absolutely can't.
Like guilty or not guilty. You really, really cannot do that. You have to wait till everything's in, and then the judge is going to instruct them on the law, and then they can deliberate. And only till then can they start discussing what they think happened.
In this kind of case, are there lesser charges? Because I know sometimes you see in a murder, an actual murder case, it's like, well, the judge could instruct like, oh, you might not find them guilty of murder, but maybe manslaughter. Is there lesser charges when it comes to conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with evidence? And
no, I mean, if you look at this case rationally, right? And so she's basically, they're proving that she was murdered once again by photos duelists. You know, it seems like I keep repeating that, but it's true. So whether or not she helped has nothing to do with it, whether it's a manslaughter or a murder. We really don't know, right? So I don't think that would matter at all. As far as tampering, it speaks for itself.
what would you like to see in the next couple weeks?
I'd like to see the pace picked up a little bit, but that's just me. You know, I'd like things to go a little more quickly, and I know people are a little more deliberate. Everyone has their own style. But I'm always cognizant, at least when I'm trying a case, of what the jury's doing. If I see them checking out when I'm talking to them, it's like, okay, I know I got to change tact. If you're talking to a witness too long, you can pick up on it. And so that's the thing we don't have sitting here in the courtroom. I'm pretty sure, I mean, there are people that are like, okay, let's get down to it, because that's how I feel. Maybe it's entering their minds. I think a lot of people feel that way.
Well, you were saying that there's even some confusion with people coming to you because they think you're her defense attorney.
Well, yeah, that's problematic. If they're listening to this, they're going to feel stupid. But the point being is, yeah, people don't focus like you think they would. I don't know how someone would think that I'm representing this lady. I'm not, and we're really clear about it. You know, and then people are telling me that she's either not guilty or guilty. I tell everybody, how do you know? You know, we're not there yet. Let's see all the evidence from the state. Let's see if the defense has any evidence, you know. And so we're just commenting on what's going on. And you know, I have a belief, my firm belief is that, yes, she was murdered, okay? And I think they've proven that beyond a reasonable doubt. But the key is, Photos Duelist isn't on trial. She is, and somehow you got to connect it up. Yeah,
and this is just commentary. None of us are the ones actually putting on the case, and we don't have that opinion. And hopefully, you know, the jury hasn't formed that opinion yet, with about maybe 3 weeks still left in this trial.
Yeah, but it's looking good for her so far as I can see, about as good as it really can look, being in her position. I mean, usually in a case, no matter what, there's going to be a witness that's a problem, right? And you're like, geez, you know, if the jury believes this person, I'm really in a lot of trouble. I've yet to see that witness.
It's interesting to start Monday, and I don't know. I know Matt says they're expected to hear Monday from the DNA expert, but that's I've listened to some of these DNA experts, and there is a lot of scientific jargon that goes on, and a lot of the times you have to wait 20 full minutes for them to say, yes, actually that DNA shows that it points to Jennifer. And maybe that's not the best thing to start with on a Monday morning when you're trying to get everyone's attention again.
I agree. Yeah, they lose me too. But, you know, I get the report, so I can read the report. I know what it's going to say. The state knows, the defense knows. But then again, it doesn't say anything about her. So, okay, you can establish that all you want. They're really harping on the fact that Photos killed her. I think they've done that job. They could tighten it up maybe a little more quickly, and then move on to whatever evidence they think they have, their best evidence, put it forth while they still have the jury's attention, while the jury's still intact, and see where the case goes.
Kara may have asked you this before. Do you think she'll take the stand?
There's no way to know. I mean, I have no idea. And ultimately, though, it's up to her. And that's the one choice the defendant gets to make.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. I know I really appreciate this insight, too, because I'm just able to kind of check in and out all week. I see Matt's scripts, that sort of thing. So I think everybody really, really appreciates you having this insight.
Well, thank you. I enjoy it.
All right. Well, much more on the trial later this afternoon. You can continue watching the case live from the courtroom on WFSB Plus. As you heard Matt say, it is done for the day, but it'll pick right back up on Monday, and he'll have a summary in our afternoon shows.